What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
1-833-288-EWTN.
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
1-833-288-3986.
What's stopping?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
What's stopping you? This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
And a happy Wednesday to you. Welcome again to Call to Communion, the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters, those of you who are looking for some answers for questions about the Catholic faith, trying to figure out, why does the church teach such and such? Does the church actually teach such and such? You could be laboring under a misconception of what the Catholic Church actually teaches. So consider this a great resource for getting those questions answered. Here's our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Outside the U.S. and Canada, please dial the American country code, which is, for most people, 1, and then 205-271-2985. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for our response and then text us your first name and your brief question. Message and data rates may apply. Again, the phone number 833-288-EWTN. We are locked and loaded on this Wednesday edition of Call to Communion. Charles Beery is our producer, Ryan Penny is our phone screener, and Jeff Burson is on social media. He'll be glad to pass on any questions you may want to pose via YouTube or Facebook. We're streaming there live right now. I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders.
Hi, Tom.
How are you today, my friend?
You know, I am all right. How about you?
Couldn't be better. It's a beautiful day here in Birmingham. And we're going to lead off with a very interesting question here as we're getting some of the calls screened. This is an email from Luis. Actually, a Facebook question. Luis says, I have started to lean towards Buddhism and am drawn by the mindfulness practice and the feeling of peace. I grew up Protestant, as in Baptist, and have been for the last 35 years of my life a Baptist. I just feel like there is a lot of anxiety tied into it and closed-mindedness. I do believe in Jesus and have always felt his presence, but I'm just not sure where everything fits in. Also, there are so many different opinions on what is, quote, right or wrong. I believed in the traditional understanding of marriage. Now it seems like even churches are changing their stances on some very fundamental beliefs. What can I do? Thanks, Luis.
Luis, thank you very much. I really appreciate these questions. So I understand where you're coming from quite a lot, and many of the questions you raise and the experiences you've had are ones that I have had in my own life and led me down some of the same paths that you've gone down in terms of investigation. I would like to give you a little context, though, on this Buddhism business that you're investigating, and then maybe offer a word of explanation and encouragement about your experience of diversity in Christian practice.
Okay.
All right. So first of all, Buddhism as a historical religion means an awful lot more than what you're experiencing as the practice of mindfulness. All right. So there is a movement in the modern secular West to as a therapeutic practice, a kind of clinical practice, to kind of disengage from your conscious, discursive life, your thinking and your anxieties and worries, and to just, sort of non-judgmentally and rather passively let your consciousness sort of adrift and then bring your attention to some object but let go of it. And then in this way to kind of detach from all the worries and anxieties of life. And a fellow named John Kabat-Zinn is very active in promoting this in secular psychology, mindfulness-based stress reduction, this kind of thing. It's all over the place. And you see it on magazine covers and people sitting serenely on yoga mats wearing stretch pants with little potted plants next to them. And yeah, it's calming. I get that. All right. Here's the difficulty. That's not Buddhism. It's not Buddhism at all. But it is a door into Buddhism for many people, right? Because they see it's associated with the Buddhist tradition. But I want you to back up and consider, do you need the whole apparatus of historical Buddhism in order to practice relaxation techniques? All right? And all you got to do is ask the question. You realize, no, I don't need the whole apparatus of Buddhism to practice relaxation techniques. And detaching from your discursive anxieties and worries through a kind of mental discipline is something that is not unique to Buddhism, and has been part of the Christian tradition and of non-religious traditions as well. And it's simple logic that if you are taken up with worries and anxieties, then backing up from those worries and anxieties in your thinking is going to have a calming effect.
Sure.
All right. But you don't have to go swallow the whole hog with historic Buddhism to get that effect. And actual Buddhism, right, involves many more commitments than just let me sit on a yoga mat and calm my mind. And for what it's worth, for most Buddhists throughout history, the sit on a yoga mat and calm my mind business is not how they spend their time. And not until the 20th century, and particularly in Burma, did your average Asian Buddhist have anything to do with that. For them, Buddhism primarily meant trying to do good deeds and give alms to Buddhist monks and to perform acts of worship and devotion to Buddhist iconography and statues and so forth in the hopes of generating good karma so they could have a favorable rebirth in another life. All right, so there's a whole structure of belief there that's in the worship of the Buddha as a kind of divine savior character whose grace and merit can come to your aid. Lots of beliefs that are not directly related to this, yoga mat business. All right.
Sure.
So do you need to swallow all that? Well, I think it's ill-advised to go in that direction because you're asked to believe many absurd things if you go and become a card-carrying Buddhist. The first thing you have to do to become a Buddhist is pledge to follow take the triple refuge in the Buddha. Actually, I'm going to take him as my guide and do what he says and believe what he says. Why should you do that? Buddha's not a divine figure, and his claim to illumination and wisdom is highly suspect and easily questionable because you have to rely in faith that he's had all these clairvoyant experiences and can see into the deep nature of reality. Claims that are entirely unverifiable and largely superstitious. So you don't need to swallow the whole shebang of Buddhism just to have a calming experience and get away from your stresses and anxieties. On the other side of the break, I'm going to make some suggestions about how you can accomplish that as a Christian and how to deal with the problems you raised of Christians disagreeing with Christians.
Sounds good. Luis, sit tight. We'll continue this on the other side. We'll also be talking with Stephen in Commerce, Texas. And we'll get a question here from Nigeria, also on Facebook. Lots more straight ahead on this edition of Call to Communion.
Sometimes we may be asked by those who don't pray on a regular basis, why should we pray, or why do we pray? Well, I pray to get closer to God. And I always think about what my patron saint, St. Teresa of Avila, said. She said prayer is really nothing more than a conversation with a friend. If we think about it that way, it will help us guide our conversations with God, which we should be having as often as possible.
Father Benedict Rochelle.
I must tell you that from what I observe from very young people, all of these blasphemers, all of these mockers are in for a tough time. Because the devil bites his own tail. And I find among young people a growing reverence and longing for God. I find a decline in the cynicism and skepticism around, because it had to destroy itself. No one can live on being an enemy of God. It's too crazy, it's too absurd, it's too dark, it's too bleak. God is beautiful, God is holy. Why in the world mock God?
The people you know and trust are on EWTN.
It's Call to Communion here on EWTN. Our phone number 833-288-EWTN. That's 288-3986. Before we get back to Luis's question, I want to tell you about a great new show that we have for you every weekend here on EWTN Radio. It's called Dr. Doctor, featuring Dr. Chris Stroud, Dr. Tom McGovern, and Dr. Andrew Mullally. They'll be discussing medical issues from a Catholic perspective. And this show, Dr. Doctor, is the official radio show of the Catholic Medical Association. So you know it's going to be good. Check it out, 11 a.m. Eastern here on EWTN, Saturday mornings, right here and only here. And let's get back to that question now from Luis, checking us out on Facebook, talking about leaning towards Buddhism and the practice, which is very hot these days, mindfulness.
Right. So Luis said that he's been practicing mindfulness meditation, and he's been kind of chilling out and feeling calm, and that's making him interested in Buddhism. And so before the break, I was saying, well, look, I got no problem with chilling out and being calm and getting away from your anxieties, and that's a good thing to do, and it's part of the Christian tradition as well. But you don't have to swallow the whole hog and become a Buddhist just because you find it peaceful to get away from your anxious thoughts for a while, right? And there's no logic to that decision. Like you can detach from your anxious thoughts and calm down and take a step back in life without swallowing the whole Buddhist religion that requires that you affirm many things that are contrary to reason and experience. And I won't go into a whole, apologetic about Buddhism, but there's a lot of things that Buddhists believe that are not essentially connected to just chilling out on your yoga mat.
Yeah.
Okay. So what to do? Well, simply seeking calmness and peace or escape from sufferings and troubles is not a sufficient philosophy of life. You don't believe me? I'll demonstrate it to you. So, I love my dad. He's a great guy. He provided for his family wonderfully, right? He taught us to go to church. He taught us to treat one another decently. He took care of the poor. Was a man of virtue and good character, right? Sometimes we had hardship and struggle and, family crises, and he'd be there for us, somebody we could turn to. Noble, in other words.
Yes.
My grandfather, same kind of guy. When he died, folks came out of the woodwork and said he was a fine man, a man of enormous integrity, You're the sort of people that would line up in the face of a crisis and take up the mantle of responsibility and protect others. And sometimes that meant willingly enduring a lot of personal suffering in their own lives for the sake of the common good, right? What would I have thought if in the teeth of all this suffering or difficulty or conflict or problems, my dad had said, see you guys, I'm going to my yoga mat. It's not very noble.
No.
Right? And in fact, when Buddhism first went to China, the Confucianists, that was their big indigenous Chinese philosophy. Their big objection to Buddhism is Buddhists are selfish. That was their view, right? The Confucianists, Neo-Confucianists, Buddhists are selfish because they're sitting on the yoga mat. Well, they didn't have yoga mats back then, but basically they're concerned about their own quietude. Mm-hmm. But there's a world out there to deal with.
Sure.
Right? You got to deal with the world. And so, if you want to live a life that's oriented towards your own personal escape from suffering, well, first of all, good luck.
Yeah.
Right? Because you don't actually escape suffering. You can't actually, it's a lie that you can fundamentally escape suffering. And secondly, those aren't really the people we ultimately admire, nor is it really a fully human life, one that says I'm oriented towards inoculating myself against suffering. No, that may be a part of life, but life is about bearing responsibility out of charity for the love of neighbor. Right? And it's kind of despicable, someone who would just withdraw themselves from the responsibility of being alive just to inoculate themselves against suffering. Yeah. Christ doesn't do this, right? And when I look at this mindfulness business and compare that to Jesus, think about Christ's agony in the garden. I mean, this is hardly like the sort of peaceful yoga mat moment for him.
Yeah.
I mean, he is sweating blood in an agony of anticipation. And what is his response to that? Not my will, but thine be done. I will go to the death of martyrdom for the sake of those I love, rather than seek solace in my own meditative quietude, which was an option.
No.
But he didn't do that, right? And that's, of course, far more admirable as a type of human being, the ultimate human being, the God-man, who suffers humiliation, death, and abandonment for the sake of those he loves. Right? That's the kind of life we want to live. And that's what the Christian faith, and particularly the Catholic faith, seeks to offer us. And here is the great mystery, right? That when we surrender ourselves to follow Christ and rely on His grace, cooperate with His grace and the gifts of the Holy Spirit, that we will nevertheless find that peace that transcends mere meditative quietude, because it is ultimately in union with not the void, not with nothingness, not with the force, not with the Buddha nature, but with the one God of the whole universe, who is the highest good and the infinite source of all goodness itself, in light of which everything else pales in comparison.
Yeah.
And if you read the lives of the saints, you'll see that amidst their trials and sufferings and tribulations that were real, that they didn't escape, nevertheless they found a peace of mind that transcended anything the world had to offer. Now, your experience in the Baptist Church, you talk about anxiety and guilt and so forth. I get that. I understand that. My job here is not defending the Baptist Church. I left the Baptist Church. I left the Presbyterian Church for the Catholic tradition, because it was in that tradition that I found a deep tradition of interior life and prayer, meditation and devotion, to help deal with all these conflicts in our inner life that I didn't find that in Presbyterianism, didn't find that in the Baptist Church. And we have these resources to make sense of these experiences in light of divine grace, in light of the life of Christ. I'm going to give you some resources that you might consider. One, a program we have on EWTN radio. It's called Divine Intimacy Radio, hosted by Dan Burke and his wife, Stephanie Burke. And it's all about the life of contemplative prayer and the disciplines of prayer. And that means something different to a Catholic than it means to a Baptist. Father Timothy Gallagher, who's been a guest on EWTN many times, and he's got some podcasts, Discerning Hearts podcast, about consolation and desolation in the spiritual life, following the methods of Ignatius of Loyola. All right, another great resource for how do I actually think about my own interior experience and examine it, and even if you want, be mindful of it, right? But in order to conform my life to Christ and to orient myself towards those consolations that lead to God. The books and talks of Father Thomas Dubay, who's also been, he's deceased now, God rest his soul, but he was a frequent contributor to EWTN programming. Excellent on the interior life. And if you really want to dive into the depths, then you can pick up John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, St. Francis de Sales, Reginald Garrigou-Lagrange, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine of Hippo. These are the masters of the interior life of the Catholic tradition. Please learn your own tradition before you throw it under the bus and go off after exotic, esoteric Orientalism.
And Luis, thank you for your very thoughtful letter and for checking us out on Facebook. We do appreciate it. It's called to Communion here on EWTN. If you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN. We begin with Stephen in Commerce, Texas, checking us out today on Guadalupe Radio. Stephen's a first-time caller. Hello, Stephen. What's on your mind today?
I have a friend that I'm trying to convert, convert to Catholicism, and he says that he will read some books on it, but he only wants to read short books for some reason. I don't know if it's his eyesight or what, but I was just wondering if Dr. Andrews could perhaps provide the name of some books like that.
Thanks. Where is your friend coming from spiritually or philosophically? Is he a practitioner of any faith tradition right now or of nothing?
He's more or less a Baptist.
He's a Baptist. Okay. And is he kind of a fundamentalist?
I don't. Perhaps to some extent. I don't know if he's.
Well, one place to begin might be Scott Hahn's first book, Rome, Sweet Home. Another one would be Catholicism and Fundamentalism by Carl Keating.
Very good.
Born Fundamentalist, Born Again Catholic is another title. I would love it if he read my book, How the Catholic Church Saved My Marriage, which is about a lot more than marriage. It's really, an apology for the Catholic faith and story of my journey from Protestantism to Catholicism. if you want to go back a little bit in time, the works of G.K. Chesterton have been appealing to many people. Frank Sheed, his books, Theology and Sanity, among others. So all of these are good resources. But you might start with Scott Hahn.
Very good. And Stephen, thank you so much for your call. That opens up a line for you now at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. It's called to communion here on EWTN. Here is a question via Facebook. Chike from Nigeria. I think I got that right. Chike says, when did celibacy start in the Catholic Church?
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate the question. So celibacy in the Catholic Church started with her founder, Jesus Christ, who was celibate and renounced marriage, earthly marriage, because he came not to do his own will, but the will of him who had sent him, namely God. And the Apostle Paul also was celibate, and he talks about it, of course, in his first letter to the Corinthians, and he says, I wish that you guys would be like me, right, that I don't have a wife, so I can give myself entirely to the work of the Lord. And so celibacy in the founder, right, the God-man Jesus, celibacy in the life of the apostle, and then from the beginning, there have always been celibates and renunciates in the Christian tradition. It was always an ideal of the clerical state, of the priestly life, such that even when married men were ordained to the clerical state, it was very common for them to cease having conjugal relations with their wives after ordination and to live continent lives. So even when they were married, a lot of times they lived like celibates. They lived like brothers and sisters. Not always, but oftentimes they did. We begin to get legislation on it in church law in late antiquity, and of course it becomes the universal law of the Latin Church in the Middle Ages. But it had never ceased to be an ideal, and the most perfect way of sanctity being the evangelical counsels of poverty, chastity, perfect chastity, and obedience informed the development of what we call religious life, the life of the Desert Fathers, the first ascetics and the monks, Benedictine monasticism, which has always been part of the Latin tradition, and has informed so much of Catholic spirituality down through the centuries. So it's always been an ideal of Christian life and of the clerical state, but it hasn't always been enacted in legislation governing the life of all priests of the Latin Rite.
It does seem very logical, though, doesn't it? I mean, if you're divided, then you can't give anything your whole heart.
Well, even in Paul's letters, when he talks to married couples, he suggests that they should abstain from sexual relations periodically in order to give themselves to the life of prayer. And the ascetical disciplines of fasting and sexual abstinence and watchings and almsgiving and these kinds of things, these sorts of disciplines have always been an intrinsic part of the contemplative life. One has to renounce all defilements of flesh and spirit, right? And that's what Paul says in 2 Corinthians, chapter 7, like rid yourself of all defilements of flesh and spirit. No, those ascetical disciplines are an important part of that in order that we might purify our interior lives and obtain that purity of heart without which no one will see God. And while sexual relations, just as food, and sexual relations, food, other bodily pleasures are not intrinsically wrong, they are certainly a great distraction, can be, right,
Sure.
to a deeply contemplative life. So it's not just that the celibate priest has got more time on his hands, right, although that can be a part of it. But he's also, he's consecrated in a special way in his interior life, or ought to be, to contemplation, right, to a particular kind of character of prayer life. At least that's what he should be doing. Doesn't mean he necessarily does. I mean, you can waste your celibacy, right? I mean, a priest could live a celibate life and go home and just watch TV all day long, and he'd be a pretty worthless priest. But he could do it, right? But that's not the idea. It's not just, I'm just not going to have any attachments. No, I'm going to have some pretty profound attachments. My attachments are going to be to God and to the interior life. And so I'm trying to make space in my interior life for that kind of superordinary commitment, right, so that I can have more in the spirit than to give to the people that I care for.
Chike, thank you so much for your question there via Facebook. delighted that you're checking us out in Nigeria today. It is Call to Communion here on EWTN. Let me give you our phone numbers, and that is 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're listening outside North America, dial the U.S. country code and then 205-271-2985. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000. A lot of people like to use the texting thing these days. Here we are in the 21st century. People dig the texting. I get it. We get it. Mother Angelica always said, we need to be where the people are. If there's a new technology that's coming out, we need to look into it. And then if it makes sense, then let's get all over it, which we are. Texting, satellite radio, AM and FM, all the different media platforms. We are here for you as much as we possibly can be. Again, our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. In a moment, we're going to be talking with Paloma in Cornelius, North Carolina, checking us out on satellite radio, Sirius XM Channel 130. We also have an email coming up here from David. Wants to know about indulgences, which is one of those topics that keeps coming back again and again. We have a line open for you right now, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986 on Call to Communion.
Raymond Arroyo. We need EWTN radio for the reason that Mother Angelica founded this enterprise. She saw this as a holistic approach, reaching the whole person, bringing them truth and life.
The leading Catholic voices are on EWTN radio.
I called my wife to complain angrily about traffic the other day, and she said, I sympathize with you, but I gotta call you on to holiness right now because I love you. I love my wife for that. She told me a story that she heard of a young seminarian who was serving with the Missionaries of Charity. He was scrubbing a bathroom floor and was complaining while he was doing it. He was in a horrible mood. And this missionary of Charity walked by him and laughed. And he said, "What are you doing? Why are you laughing?" She said, "I'm laughing because you're totally wasting your time." He asked, "What are you talking about?" She said, "If you're not doing your work with love, you're totally wasting your sacrifice." Look, suffering is an unavoidable part of everyday life. But you have the power to make it a fruitful part of your spiritual life. Get intentional about offering it up in love. Anyone can do a good day well. When you suffer, when you struggle, that's your moment to become a saint. Don't waste it. Send us a message at connect@reallifecatholic.com. This is Chris Stefanik from reallifecatholic.com on EWTN Radio.
He is honored by the Church as a saint with the title of the Angelic Doctor.
Matthew Bunson and the Doctors of the Church.
St. Thomas Aquinas wrote a basic textbook for young theology students that became the Church's most famous guide to the faith, the Summa Theologica. It helped him earn the title Doctor of the Church. He died in 1274.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
Tomorrow on More to Life, the love connection.
How can couples cultivate connection in the face of everything that's pulling them apart?
Now, back to Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
The Wednesday edition of Call to Communion here on EWTN. There's a line open for you right now. If you've been wanting to get through and talk with Dr. David Anders, if you call now, you won't get a busy signal. Hooray! 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Let's go to Paloma now in Cornelius, North Carolina, listening on Sirius XM 130. Paloma's a first-time caller. Hey, Paloma, thank you for calling. What's on your mind today?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I'm a Catholic, but I have really never dared to ask what's the difference between a Catholic and a Christian.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. So, if you read the Bible, you will see that Jesus does not speak about something called Christianity. It's not a word that he uses, it's not a concept that he uses, and neither do the apostles use this word or this concept. Instead, Jesus talks about something called the church. And like he says to St. Peter in Matthew chapter 16, "You are the rock, and on this rock I will build my church." And he tells us what this church is. It's a society governed by the apostles, and their successors, and the society has a job. The job is to teach everything he has commanded, to hand on his tradition, and to celebrate the sacraments that he instituted. Do this in memory of me, he says. That's the church. That's the category that Christ is concerned about. He's not concerned about something called Christianity. He's concerned about something called the church. And when you go back and read ancient Christian history, ancient lives of those who followed Christ, this is the language that they use. They're interested in the Catholic Church, this society that is Catholic. Catholic means universal. It's found everywhere throughout the world, united together under the leadership of the bishops and in the celebration of the Eucharist. And that society has continued for 2,000 years, and it continues today, and it's the Catholic Church, and that was the one founded by Jesus. But throughout history, there have been people who have seen parts of Catholicism that they liked and parts that they didn't like, and they tried to break the parts they liked out from that society and then go off and start their own thing. And they did this in a big way in the 16th century, and they were called Protestants, and they took, say, part of the Bible. They didn't take the whole Bible. They took part of the Bible, part of the doctrines of the church, some of the church's practices, and they broke away and they started their own groups. And then people broke away from them and broke away from them and broke away from them, and the next thing you know, there's thousands and thousands of these little splinter groups all over the world, and they've taken little bits and pieces of the Catholic Church, but they don't have the whole thing. Well, what are you going to call those folks? How do you think about them? Well, they're not really part of the Catholic Church fully, right? Because they don't have the whole thing. But they got little pieces of it, and they know about Jesus, and they try to follow them. So we can speak of them as Christians. Christian means somebody who follows Christ. But they're not fully Catholic because they don't have the whole business, right? They don't have everything that Christ handed on, just part of it.
Okay.
So this is a long answer to a short question, but briefly, we could say a Christian is anyone who tries to follow Christ sincerely, right? And a Catholic is a Christian who's got the whole message.
Oh, okay.
Christians, anybody trying to follow Jesus, roughly speaking. And a Catholic is a Christian, but a Christian who has the whole truth about Christ and belongs to the society that he founded.
The whole package.
He's got the whole package.
All right. There you go, and we thank you so much for your call, Paloma. It is Called to Communion here on EWTN. Our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Love to hear from you on this Wednesday afternoon. Here now is Adriana in San Antonio, listening on Guadalupe Radio, another first-time caller. Adriana, what's on your mind today?
Hi, my sister is baptizing her daughter of about 5 months, and she chose me and my husband to be her godparents if we accepted, and we, along with my sister, have gone along with the baptism classes, but the father of the child hasn't yet, and he may do so before the baptism. But my question is, what would happen if he were to not go through the baptism class? Could the baptism proceed without him, with godparents and mother?
So you've got mother and you've got godparents, but you may not have father involved in the baptism classes. So the church will baptize a child if there's a reasonable expectation that the child will be brought up in the Catholic faith. And so that's the judgment call of the priest to determine whether that reasonable standard has been met. I would imagine, of course, I'm not the priest of that parish, and I'm not going to speak for him, but my sense would be if the mother is showing up to the baptism classes and the godparents are showing up and they're all committed to bringing up the child in the Catholic way of life, they're going to have that baptism. That's going to happen.
Okay. Appreciate your call, Andrea. Adriana. Adriana, we'll get that right. It's Called to Communion here on EWTN. Our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986.
We got a text down here from Kate. Did you see that one?
I did not see that.
You mind if I read that one off? Because I like it.
Go.
Yeah, thank you. I don't want to steal your thunder, Tom, but
all good.
I didn't think you saw it. So Kate asks, how can you explain why, this was a text question. She says, why shouldn't I sin? How can you explain why you shouldn't sin? All right. That's a great question, I really appreciate it. And it goes really to the heart of the Catholic faith. And you got to understand what sin is. Okay? Got to understand what sin is from a Catholic point of view. St. Thomas says, sin is nothing other than an irrational act. It's not more or less than an irrational act. All right? Why shouldn't I pick up a hammer and beat myself in the head with it? It's an irrational act that will cause me harm.
Yes.
The answer is kind of obvious, right? You do good and avoid evil because good leads to flourishing and happiness and well-being, and evil is by definition the contrary. Why shouldn't I shove a syringe filled with heroin into my veins? Because it's really, really bad for you and will lead to wreck and ruin in your life and the lives of people around you. Right? Sin is, those things are sins. Beating yourself in the head with a hammer is a sin. Shooting heroin into your arm is a sin. As well as everything else that is against reason and tends to your own or others' destruction rather than their flourishing. Okay, so if you understand why you shouldn't beat yourself in the head with a hammer, then you also understand why you should not sin. Let's give some other concrete instances.
Okay.
So one of the capital sins of the Catholic Church, well, in the Catholic tradition, capital means like a biggie from which other sins tend to flow, all right, would be, say, lust. What is lust? Lust is an inordinate, stress on the word inordinate, all right? Inordinate means not in an ordinate or well-ordered manner. An inordinate attachment or desire for the pleasure of sexual contact. Now, all you've got to do is consider the fruit in your and others' life when someone is inordinately, like in an unordered way, attached to that particular good. Well, all you got to do is flip on the news and see what happens to individuals in their lives when they live their lives motivated in an irrational way towards the pursuit of that particular kind of bodily pleasure. Sometimes they end, horrible deaths by suicide in jail cells, right? And when they use their substantial financial resources to sustain a life oriented towards nothing else. It's rather despicable. People have their lives ruined, and they end up, dying in that kind of way. I remember one time I met a publisher. I have a relative who's a writer and has contact with a lot of these folks, and this guy met a publisher. I ran into him. I was at a party. We're shaking hands. I'm like, how are you doing? What's up with you? And he'd never met me before. And he said, hi, I'm so-and-so. And he began a litany of his accomplishments.
Oh, my.
And I sat there. I was kind of dumbfounded. I'd never met a guy like this before. It was literally like, here I am. Here's everything I've done in life that's admirable or worthy, worthy of honor and adulation.
Here's my resume.
Here's my resume, basically. And it was just praise me, praise me, praise me, praise me, praise me. And so obviously it seemed evident to me that the fellow had a little issue with pride.
You think?
Yeah. You know what that did? It made him ridiculous.
Yeah.
It made him ridiculous and also made it incapable for him to have meaningful human relationships. Because a meaningful friendship is reciprocal.
Sure.
But if you're obsessed with your own vainglory, you become incapable of loving relationship with another. Now I've been that guy too, right? I was throwing this guy under the bus, but I've also been the guy who wanted to just say nothing but my own glory and so forth. And it destroys your relationships.
It does.
Pride's bad for you. Lust is bad for you. Do we need to go into gluttony? Everybody in America dies of being obese and having heart disease, all right? Bad for you, all right? Sloth, well, you don't want to spend your life doing good or sitting on the couch, right? I mean, you just go through the list of the traditional capital sins in the Catholic tradition. Every one of them tends to some kind of suffering for the perpetrator and or his or her victims. So that's why you don't sin. You don't hit yourself in the head with a hammer.
But what a great question for her to pose it exactly in that way.
I think what would motivate a question like that is some people who have been raised, particularly in other Christian groups, tend to think that sin is simply arbitrary divine prohibition, right? The kind of stuff that would get lampooned in a Monty Python skit, Thou shalt not, eat cheese every other Tuesday, with one hand tied behind your back. I mean, there's no sense to it. They don't see the reason behind it. It just seems like an arbitrary prohibition that serves no purpose, right? And there are some Christian groups that treat sin and vice and virtue as if they were simply prescribed by divine authority without reason. That's just not the way Catholics understand sin. Sin is always and only ordered towards some good or away from some good. It's virtue or vice or virtue, all right, that's accessible to reason. And when you understand it that way, then morality, the moral life, the virtuous life, becomes not some arbitrary imposition, but the science of human happiness revealed to us by God and by human reason.
Yes, indeed. It is called to communion here on EWTN. Kate, thank you so much for your question. We're going to get back to the phones in a moment here. A couple of housekeeping things. First of all, number one, the phone number, and that is 833-288-EWTN. If you have a question for Dr. David Anders, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Okay, here is number two. No matter where you're listening to us, you may not have heard, well, you probably have heard about the smart speakers that are out there, like Google Plus and Amazon Echo. They're fantastic, and you can listen to EWTN and this show on that platform. All you have to do is, for example, you could say, Alexa, ask EWTN to play Call to Communion. Or you could say, Alexa, ask EWTN to listen to the previous episode of Call to Communion. It's another way that EWTN is everywhere. Okay, here is announcement number 3, and then I promise we'll get back to the phones. And this is very exciting. Earlier, David was talking about his book, The Catholic Church Saved My Marriage. I'm here to tell you that book is now available as an audiobook by going to Audible. So if you would like to get the audiobook version of this great book, The Catholic Church Saved My Marriage, narrated by my friend David Anders. Did a fine job on it, by the way.
Edited by my friend Tom Price.
I'm glad to be playing a little bitty part of that. Anyway, check it out.
I think I just about killed you when we made that audiobook. You're like, stop, do that again.
It's okay. Well, you know,
quit spitting at the microphone, Anders.
We have standards around here. Come on. So the point is, it's a great book, and you can get it on audiobook right now. I mean, if you're traveling during the summer and the fall, it's a wonderful resource for you. Go to audible.com and then just type in David Anders in the search bar, and you will find it. It's available right now on Audible. So there's our little announcements.
Well, thanks.
Back to the phones here at 833-288-EWTN. Frank is listening in Taunton, Massachusetts on Sirius XM 130. Hey, Frank, what's on your mind today?
Good afternoon, guys. Dr. Anders, it's a pleasure and an honor to speak with you.
Thank you.
I was brought up an LCMS Lutheran. I've since come to realize that the true church, that's not the true church. That the Reformation was based on a false premise of sola scriptura, and I'm very interested in converting to Catholicism or Orthodoxy. My one big question, my one big stumbling block is why in the Roman Church you only receive the host and not the wine. My Orthodox friends tell me that's almost sinister, and that Jesus said that take and eat my flesh, take and drink my blood. He didn't say that take and eat my flesh, within it contains blood. And this is the one big question that I have, is why in the Roman Church we only receive the host.
Okay, I got a lot to say on this. Let me ask you a question. Did Jesus ever command laity to receive Holy Communion under either kind?
I don't know. No, he just says apostles, right?
That's right, of course. So the only time Christ ever immediately gives this command is to the apostles as he ordains them priests. And we have no rubrics in the Bible that would describe this, right? Beyond the fact that we know that the privilege was abused by laity in Corinth. And St. Paul calls out people who were receiving Holy Communion in an unworthy manner and getting drunk on the precious blood and bringing death and wreck and ruin upon themselves, right? But Christ himself doesn't prescribe this to the laity. And so that's one thing I will say. Another thing I'm going to say is that if you are attracted to Eastern liturgical practice, you say, I like the way those Byzantines go to communion. I kind of groove with that. Well, you can become an Eastern Rite Catholic. So if there's something about the Eastern patrimony, spirituality, liturgy, theology that you find attractive, you can join a Byzantine Catholic Church, a Melkite Catholic Church, a Ruthenian Catholic Church, a Ukrainian Catholic Church, a Maronite Catholic Church, a Syrian Catholic Church. I mean, need I go on? There's about 22 of them, right? I mean, there's a whole bunch of Eastern Catholic churches that follow Eastern liturgy and spirituality and theology, and they're fully Catholic, right? So in your neighborhood, you just look up, Byzantine Catholic Church or Eastern Catholic Church, see what, or you can call the diocese and ask, or where are the Eastern Rite Catholic parishes in this neighborhood, and you can go find one and see if that's what you're looking for, and you can become Catholic and be in union with the Universal Church and the Pope, but you can still satisfy that interest that you have in that particular spirituality or liturgical practice. So you don't have to go Orthodox. You don't have to reject the primacy of the Pope in order to follow that inclination. And I've got friends that have done that. They, like you, they converted from Protestantism to Catholicism, but instead of becoming Roman Rite, they just went straight over and became Eastern Rite Catholics. Mm-hmm. So the real issue, now why, but that doesn't get to your question. Why would you not receive in both kinds in the Catholic Church, in the Latin Rite Catholic Church? First of all, sometimes we do. And in the parish that I go to, communion both kinds is always available to the laity. And so if that's also of interest to you, if you want to be a Latin Rite Catholic and you want to receive in both kinds, you find a parish where it's always available in both kinds. Because plenty of parishes, it's available in both kinds, like mine, every week, every Sunday, it's always available in both kinds. But why would it be okay? Why would it be okay to only receive in one kind? Let's delve for a moment into the theology of the Eucharist, if you will permit me. And as you know, this was an issue in the Reformation as well, right? But prior to Luther, the Bohemians, and Luther was aware of the Bohemians, the Hussites, the Utraquists, those who demanded communion in both kinds, were agitated on this issue. So it was familiar to Luther. Mm-hmm. The Eucharist is two things. All the other sacraments are one thing. The Eucharist alone is two things. It is a sacrament, and it is a sacrifice. It is a sacrament and a sacrifice. As a sacrifice, it's something offered to God. As a sacrament, it's something that God offers to us. It's both things. And what it signifies is a little bit different under each of those two descriptions. So as a sacrament, John chapter 6 talks about this. Whoever eats my flesh, drinks my blood, has life. All right? It is a testament to, and it effects the actual saving presence of Christ within us. As I feed on the body and blood of Christ, I receive the supernatural nourishment of his flesh and blood, which are for me salvation. The medicine of immortality, St. Ignatius of Antioch calls it. Now, when I receive the sacred host, do I receive that body and blood? Yes, I do. I certainly do. I receive the whole Christ under the species of the host. Whole thing. I receive his body and blood in the host. Or are you telling me, and I know you're not telling me this, that when the priest consecrates the host, he's just drained all of Jesus' blood out of his body and put it over there in the chalice? Absolutely not. That would be to kill Jesus. That would be to immolate him again, literally. But he only dies once on Calvary. When the priest consecrates the host, he doesn't drain Christ of his blood like some sacerdotal vampire. He leaves Christ whole and entire. And Christ whole and entire comes to me in the sacred host, and I receive the entirety. And as a sacrament, it is a sign of that presence with me, and I get the whole thing, the whole Christ, however I commune, whether in one kind or both. So I lose nothing. Okay. I lose nothing in my communion if I receive only in one kind. So why then would Christ give me the Eucharist in two kinds? Why body and blood? Right? I mean, he could have designated any symbol and said, this stands for my corporeal presence. Mm-hmm. Why bread and wine? Now we have to consider the Eucharist as sacrifice. As sacrifice, the death of Christ is represented to me. It is put on display before me through the symbols of body and blood presented in a state of separation. Body over here, blood over there. Bread over here, wine over there. You separate body from blood, you've got death. Is Jesus actually separated? No. I got the whole Christ in the host, I got the whole Christ in the chalice. But the signs, and the Eucharist is not only a sign, but it is not less than a sign. It is a sign that has efficacy to it. Mm-hmm. The sign is of Christ presented in a state of immolation, the death of Jesus, because to sacrifice something involves immolation, right? The destruction of the victim. And in the Eucharist, Christ is not destroyed or immolated or killed, but his death is represented through the double consecration of bread and wine. That's why there are two kinds. And then that same victim who died on Calvary is present. The same priest who offered it is present. For the same reason, the redemption of the world is present. And in that way, the sacrifice of Calvary is present to me through the same victim, the same priest, and the same intent. And that same offering is then offered to God the Father in reparation for the sins of the world in the sacrifice of the Mass. The culmination of which, and the completion of that oblation, is my communion, which is a separate thing. So the theology underlying communion and sacrifice, one kind, two kinds, gets into the justification of communion in one kind. Now, there's a practical reason for communing in one kind, and that is the avoidance of scandal, right? Lest somebody spill the precious blood, which has unfortunately happened. Mm-hmm. Or, as in the case of Corinth, somebody gorges the precious blood, became inebriated or something. There's all kinds of things that can happen handling the sacred vessels, and particularly the chalice, because of the nature of the element being liquid, right? Mm-hmm. Well, the nature of the accidents, I should say, being liquid. So there you go. That's the position.
Frank, thank you so much for your call. Let's go to John in Buffalo, New York, listening on the Station of the Cross. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Tom, thank you. And Dr. Anders, it's a pleasure to listen to you. I had the opportunity a year ago to see your weekend conference in Bowmansville, New York. And I was just wondering when the next time you're going to be traveling up on a seminar area for Buffalo, New York.
As soon as I'm asked to. So if you guys would like me to come to Buffalo again, please get a group together or go appeal to the parish. And I forget the name. It was a grotto shrine. I've gone. Maybe you remember where we were. I can't remember the name of the church.
Do you remember where that was, John?
It was in Bowmansville. I forget the name also.
Okay.
But they had this wonderful shrine, kind of a pilgrimage site, and all these stones and rocks that had been built from outlying forest. It was a beautiful site. And I remember they had a Polish priest who was incarnated now in Buffalo, and a wonderful guy. And I had a great time, so I'd love to go back. If you guys want to invite me, I'm coming back.
Thanks for your call, John. Let's go to Sean real quick in Port Perry, Ontario. Sean, we have about 30 seconds. What's your question?
Oh, I wish I had more time, because this is, I think this could be complicated. I have a Baptist friend who says she can prove to me that there was never intended to be a pope. Because if St. Peter was the Bishop of Rome, then why did St. Paul write the letter to the Romans?
Let me answer, because I've only got about 5 seconds left. I appreciate the question. First of all, there's nothing stopping an apostle or his successor, the bishop, from writing an admonitory letter to the church at Rome. In fact, that happens all the time today. I mean, we've had like umpteen zillion letters written by various bishops in conferences and groups, either to the clergy of Rome or to the Pope. I mean, it happens today. I mean, it's happened like this year, all right? Secondly, we don't know the exact date of Romans and where that stands in Peter's own biography. I mean, Peter was the bishop of Antioch before he was the bishop of Rome. And it wouldn't be the first time that Paul thought Peter was falling down on the job.
That's true. Absolutely. Sean, thank you so much for your call. Glad we could squeeze it in there. Dr. David Anders, thank you, sir.
Hey, thanks, Tom.
We do the program Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Eastern here on EWTN, with an encore at 11 p.m. Eastern and a best-of show Sundays at 2 p.m. Eastern. On behalf of Charles, Ryan, and Jeff, I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders. Thank you so much for joining us. See you tomorrow right here on Call to Communion. Have a great day, and God bless.
Hey y'all, this is Father Mitch Packer. Open Line Wednesday is next on EWTN Radio.
EWTN is now on Twitter. Get short, timely messages from EWTN on your computer or cell phone. It's easy to stay up to date on a wide variety of topics. Pro-life news, Vatican announcements, catechesis, apologetics, the latest EWTN programming, and more. You can link to EWTN on Twitter from our homepage or go to twitter.com/EWTN.